Mr. Grinkey.
Yes, sir.
First of all, you're known as the Sour Jesus, right? Or Sour God.
Oh, shit.
Could you tell us why you're named Sour Jesus?
Yeah, I've been called the Sour Jesus. It's not a name I gave myself, but what I learned early on with nicknames is you try to embrace them as opposed to try to keep them at bay, because the minute you try to walk away from a potential nickname is the minute it sticks and won't ever leave you. So I just took it on.
Could you tell us about your position at the brewery?
So I'm director of production at the brewery. I focus on R&D, innovation, and our wood programs. Wood programs being the Bruery Terruexeso barrel-aged sour program and our bourbon barrel-aged or spirit program at the brewery, big stouts and that kind of stuff. A big part of my job is to hold us true at the brewery to the beers we've made in the past, and to make sure as we're recreating those beers that there's a sense of purpose, and that those beers are continually trying to be better than the beers before them, all the while holding, respect towards what came before. And that's a great part of my job, but the best part of my job and the most fun that I have doing is creating the brewery's next thing, the next big thing that we're going to do. And those are hard to come by. We'll try 100 new things a year, and there might be the next big thing in there, but there's bound to be a few that aren't ever going to be done again. But every once in a while we find that really special beer that needs to be brought and taken to more people. So.
No, I 100% agree. Like, for example, I think the Hellas Lager that you guys put out, even though it doesn't get the best ratings on Untappd, for me, it was one of the best beers I've had in Southern California.
Yeah.
It's a great beer.
Right.
It really is, which brings us to the next question.
Yep.
If you're brewing, what do you think is harder to brew? A great Hellas Lager or a barrel-aged Imperial Stout?
I would say it's harder to brew a great Hellas Lager than it is to brew a great bourbon barrel-aged stout. To expand on that, the lager is one and done. You get one shot. It's in the tank. It's out of the tank, and it is what it is. And if you did not take care of that product correctly in tank, if you cut corners or you did anything that, quite honestly, we're teaching our brewers not to do, you're going to end up with a product that's subpar. With barrel aging, it's a little bit of different sport, if you will. You never make a certain amount of beer for barrel aging and ever anticipate getting all of that beer back. It doesn't work that way. So if you make 20 barrels of beer, physical barrels of beer, and put them in your cellar, a year later, you would be a fool to think I have 20 barrels of beer to use this year. More often than not, you're going to have about 17. 3 of them are going to go bad. One of them there may have been an accident with an employee. There are all kinds of things that you can't plan for. So the longer you hold, the longer you have beer, the longer a project takes you, the more diminishing returns you're going to get as far as volume goes. Also, there's the ability to blend, as we were talking about in other moments, that sometimes putting all the beer together doesn't make the best beer. So if it doesn't make the best beer, then why do you have to put it all together? Because if the thing is about making the best beer you can make, then the volume isn't really the thing.
I guess a good example of that would be the Black Tuesday that was aged in North American port, right?
Correct.
I wanted to expand on that a little because that beer was a single barrel, correct?
It was 4 barrels.
4 barrels,
Yeah.
and all 4 of them were aged for 4 years in North American port.
Correct.
Is there any reason why you didn't put an age statement on that beer?
In what way?
Well, personally, I'm not a big fan of port. I'm not a big fan of
Yeah.
fortified wine just because I think there's too much funk associated with that type of spirit. And when I see a Black Tuesday stout that's been aged for more than 2 years, I'm already thinking, hey, it's going to taste like soy sauce, or it's going to have too much umami flavor.
Sure.
When I see 4 years of port barrel on a label, I'm kind of drawn back and a little bit more in a defensive stance. So
Okay.
I'm curious if that was the same kind of thought process behind it.
It's a tricky question. It's a good question. But the deal is that beer and the other 2 beers that were in that pack were only canned for a virtual Black Tuesday party. So it wasn't a bottle of brewery beer. It wasn't a major release. It was simply something that we did in place of a Black Tuesday party. There was a reason for that. There was a business need to figure out a way in this pandemic to bring in revenue that we had planned for but no longer had the ability to host a party. So I scoured our cellar looking for opportunities. And so those opportunities came in, you know, these vanilla extract barrels and the maple syrup barrels and the North American port barrels that we've been holding on to probably 18 months longer than most of my colleagues wanted to, simply because I didn't want to take the easy way out with those things. I thought they were phenomenal beers, and I wanted to make sure we used them in the right way, that we didn't take these vanilla extract barrels that had had Black Tuesday in them for 3.5 years and just blend them into a stout that needed the vanilla component, and it just kind of went away. I wanted to make sure that didn't happen. And so, you know, that virtual happy hour box was like an opportunity, a virtual Black Tuesday party happy hour box or whatever it was called. You know, it was an opportunity to use this aged beer. So the cans are very simple. There was no age statement on the can per se, but I believe on the card that came in the box, it told the story of the 4 years in North American port, and the vanilla extract and the maple syrup were both 3.5 years. And if you think back to earlier this year, we released Still Black Tuesday, which is a Still Black Tuesday product that was aged over 3 years in French oak puncheons, never saw any spirit barrels. It's another example of like extreme aging. And then we did Portified Black Tuesday earlier this year as well, and that's 4 years in port barrels as well. So I think that there's something to beer age that might actually shock somebody who thinks that when they see something aged to this point is going to get too much of the umami and soy and kind of off-putting acrid sort of flavors. It doesn't mean that everything you age for 4 years will be good, but I think there's probably some stouts out there, and Black Tuesday might be one of those stouts that can hold up that long.
Let's jump straight to the Black Tuesday then. Like the Black Tuesday was brewed intentionally to be barrel aged,
correct?
Meaning dry, bitter.
Yep.
Could you expand on why that was done that way and why other breweries aren't doing that as much nowadays?
Well, I think that basically when you create a beer like Black Tuesday, it is destined for a barrel because of its two things. It has a little bit of acrid flavor to it, this kind of really young stout flavor that isn't covered over by sugar, which is a kind of a big deal in today's day and age with stainless steel stouts, that they're high in residual sugar or remaining gravity units. It's high, so that sweetness covers up the acridness. Black Tuesday is a weird beer on its own because yes, it's a huge beer, but it's also one of these beers that's a fed fermentation, and I'm not sure if you're aware of what that means, but essentially Black Tuesday as a base beer when it's brewed starts off not much different than So Happens It's Tuesday sort of beer. It's in the if you ferment it just as is, it'll end up in the 13 to 14% alcohol range. It's within the way that we ferment that beer, and we feed it more sugar as it's fermenting. So we feed it dextrose as it's fermenting. Dextrose is a corn sugar, and we feed that 3 times during the week as that beer is fermenting. And as we do that, the gravity goes up and we gain more alcohol. But it's also a cheap alcohol. So I don't mean that in a way, and edit however you feel, but I don't mean that in a way that makes it sound cheap. What I mean is it's a cheap way to gain alcohol, and with that, you don't have the finish that you want. It's not a drinkable beer fresh. And it's not even really a beer that's usable less than a year in barrel. It needs to be in barrel for a year, if not more. So it goes to barrel at around 17% alcohol, and comes out of barrel anywhere between 18.5 and 20%, depending on the pickup from the barrel per se. every beer is designed for the end product, you know, and it's just one of those beers that was never created with anything other in mind than barrel aging. And so it's never been construed in a different way. It's always been that way. And we just use different recipes for quicker turn stouts. And every once in a while we'll take some of that old Black Tuesday and just blend it into that new beer just to give it some flavor, some extra flavor.
Off the record, seriously, I've learned so much in like the past like 10 minutes. It's crazy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nice.
Like crazy. Okay, moving straight on to the Black Tuesday. You mentioned that at the bare minimum, 1-year-old barrel-aged stout, right?
Correct.
Do you personally think that barrel-aged stouts or, I don't know, barrel-aged saisons, any type of wild ales need an age statement in a way? Just because of the beer industry is growing rapidly, and you know, just a few years back, it would always just say barrel-aged stout. Now it's saying barrel-aged for 23 months, barrel-aged for 12 months.
Yeah.
Now they're even stating the type of barrel that it's aged in.
Well, I mean, do I think that barrel-aged beer, whether it be wild beer or clean beer, stouts and wheat wines and whatnot, should have an age statement? I don't know that it's necessary, but for somebody like myself, I find value in that. I find some of the best bottles of wine I've ever had aren't necessarily the best bottles of wine I've ever had, but they're the ones with the most information on the label. They're the ones where you turn over the label, it says harvested on, you know, October 12th, 2019 at 23 degrees Fahrenheit, you know, at 7 a.m. in the morning, and then the pH reading was this, and the Brix reading was this, and then it was aged in, you know, 7 neutral French barriques and 3 new American oak, so it's 30% new oak, or you know what I mean, like those kind of things. Like the more information it has from the origin story, or from, you know, especially from the maker. Like I happen to like products where the winemaker or beer maker has a signature that's on the label. Like I think that's really, really cool. You know, that's like a personification. Like I know that, you know, this guy with the big mustache that lives on a mountain, you know, somewhere made this thing, you know, and it's like I like that. So I think that the more information you have on any bottle, for me, drives that perceived value and my connection to the product, and how I'm gonna enjoy it and how I'm gonna talk about it with my friends. You know, like if I don't know anything about it, I don't know how long it's aged, I don't know any of that stuff, then there's probably not gonna be much of a story other than, hey, I got this beer from the brewery. But if I know that it was a blend of chartreuse barrels and rum barrels, the rum barrels aged for 14 months and the chartreuse was 8 months, and it was blended with, you know, pineapple and lemongrass, and the lemongrass came from somebody's uncle's farm. Like I think when you have all that stuff, that's what it becomes, something that's bigger than a beer or a bottle of wine.
The Korean beer market, it's been growing rapidly, like unbelievably at an exponential pace.
Yeah.
And Bruery is one of the beers that gets imported into South Korea. You did mention the more the merrier on the label. What do you think about this label right here? So on the back, a lot of it is in Korean, so it's going to be hard to read it out, but I'm sure you recognize the type of variety of hops on there, the cold side versus the hot side. I've never seen that on a beer label. So I think that I was fascinated by that. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's rad. And I think that, you know, oftentimes, especially with IPAs, you don't get any story. You really don't. Like you gotta almost go to the Untapped listing to find out what kind of hops are used in it. So I think, you know, this is above and beyond, but you know, calling out the hops, which ones were used on the hot side for bittering versus which hops were used on the cold side for dry hopping. I mean, there's some food pairing stuff on here. IBUs are on here too. A lot of IPAs don't list their IBUs for you. So no, I think it's really cool. And you're right, there's way more information on here. I don't read Korean. We
haven't tasted it, but that IPA is a little old. I think it's 3 months, but it's been in a refrigerator ever since it got canned. You guys can save it, drink it at another time when...
That's one of the most popular wines growing in Korea fast.
Really?
Right
from Craft Bros Brewing, I think.
I've never been a bartender. I always
but
try.
He's still a pro.
I always try, but I could never get hired. I imagine this was fairly good and fresh.
Yeah, right? I think it's great for being 4 months old and questionable transit time. And how would you guys rank this against like the local hazy style IPAs? So I guess that's like Monkish, Green Cheek,
Offshoot.
Offshoot.
What's that other one?
It is a bit on the sweeter side, but I think that might be a function of the hops kind of fading a little bit at this point. But even like countrywide, like Other Half, like Angry Chair stuff, like this is pretty much in line with all of that. I'm pretty excited about it. It's cool. I've never had any Korean beer before.
Yeah, I feel like the creaminess may have fallen off a little bit, but I think that's normal. It's good.
How you start this job?
Well, it's actually it's an American story. That's what it is.
It's a cowboy.
It's a cowboy story. It's odd. I grew up eating, you know, a very American diet and meat and potatoes, and like there's just not a lot of variety. You know, I had an artichoke the first time I went to like my neighbor's house and they had artichokes. I'd never heard of an artichoke. I was 16. You know what I mean? They had really good meat, really good potatoes. We raised cows and pigs and stuff, but I didn't meet other food types and cultures and whatnot other than at school. So when I got out of school, I started working at a place called Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's was a very young company at that time, and I started working there. I would all of a sudden be trying all these different foods all the time that I didn't even know about, you know. And then they had you know, imported beer, you know. So like I was, you know, drinking Budweiser with my friends, but like at work I would take, you know, St. Pauli Girl at the time, or Anchor Steam was like my first American craft beer, and I think Bitburger and Boddingtons, and so all these different European beers, and that's really what started American craft beer, is all the European beers. Same thing, I started drinking a lot of different wines, and during that time in my early 20s, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew what I didn't want to do, which oftentimes is more important. But when I started figuring out the things that I wanted to do, there were things that felt, you know, unattainable to me. It's like, oh, I want to brew beer, you know, or oh, I want to make wine. And so I just said that, I want to make wine, you know, and nothing ever happened, you know. I didn't make any wine, but I did homebrew a couple times and it wasn't any good. And then a number of years went by, you know, mid-20s, and I'm like, all right, you know, it's time to really do something. So I got into winemaking, and I started making wine. And I got into that, and I spent, you know, 8 to 10 years-ish, depending, in the California wine industry making wine. And absolutely loved it, but I wasn't looking for a beer job. I was looking for another wine job. And somehow I ended up sending something down here to the brewery. And Patrick, the founder of the brewery, and I started talking. And long story short, they ended up offering me a job to come here and start the Terru program for them. So the Bruery Terruexeso, so the sour beer program. So I came here as a winemaker to start this sour beer program. And there's a lot of skills to translate, but essentially it was my cellar management, fermentation management, you know, personnel management, production and fermentation management. All those kind of things do kind of fall in the same thing. And I've just been very fortunate during my time here that I started in just the sour beer sector, and now I'm director of production over all of our beers, and I have a say in everything we do. And I feel very, you know, fortunate to have that. But it's not without a lack of making everything my business, so to speak. So I never look at the beers as we make here as being my beer or somebody else's beer or their beer or his beer. It's all our beer, and so I try to keep myself in that world of we're working on all this stuff together. So it's been a little bit of a journey to get where I'm at, but I absolutely love what I do, and I love making new products, whether it be beer, wine, or sparkling water, which I still, you know, would like to do someday. So
there's a lot of new breweries that are starting up in Korea or already been kind of established. For those that are just starting in Korea, do you have any tips on like what is one key thing that you can't forget when you're making a startup brewery?
Ooh, well, that's a good one. Yeah, okay. I would say if you're starting a craft brewery, whether a young brewer, an older brewer, doesn't really matter. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to have real expectations. You have to do this job because you like the lifestyle and you love what you're doing. It's not necessarily the money maker that everybody wants it to be, although it can be for some. But I think the values and the desires need to be true, and they need to be reachable. So if you stay true to like concept and flavor, and don't push just for money, I think you can be okay. I don't know what to add after that. It sounds weird because it's a business. You have to push for money.
That was great. Would you ever want to do a collaboration, some type of barrel aging collaboration with them?
Would I ever be interested in collaborating with a Korean distillery, potentially using Korean whiskey barrels on our beer here? And the answer to that is absolutely an astounding yes. I'd love to do that. I'd love to, you know, I can speak for the brewery, and I do quite often, but I'll just speak for myself, you know, and saying as a producer and a maker, I want to meet more producers and makers, and I want to meet people that will, you know, not only help and inspire me to make a good and a better product, but will really give me a better life in general as I meet people and I find new friends and I become the greater version of whoever I'm going to be. And it's not without rubbing elbows with great people. That's how you get there, you know.
Want to hear it. This is the first time I've actually brought it to anybody else, so I'm actually really curious to see what, you know, world-class brewer team thinks of what I think is the best Korean drink. So,
Awesome. I appreciate it.
alrighty. You know, she kept on saying I should test it before I bring it to you guys, but I only have 2 bottles of it.
Okay. I don't like you guys that much.
Feel free to grab them.
Nice, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Dude, I'll go full chunk. Let's do it.
Full chunk. Good chunk.
Tell me
This
what.
is actually excellent.
Yeah.
This reminds me a lot of like horchata without cinnamon in it. This is pretty incredible.
Yes, just like that.
Horchata, yeah.
Yeah, just like
Yeah.
horchata.